This is Unit 3, Lesson 9, Solving Multi-Step Equations. The good news about this lesson is that it really isn't too much new from what we've learned before. The equations are going to be a little bit more complicated, but each individual step is solved in the same way that you did single-step equations. You just need to know what order to do them in. So let's go ahead and start with the first one. When we have an equation, we have to first identify where our variable is. We want to isolate it, that is, get it by itself. So we have to say what's on the same side of the equal sign with that x, and in this case there's a 3 and it's being multiplied by the x, and there's a positive 5, okay, and that 5 is being added. So we need to undo any adding or subtracting first before we undo any multiplication or division. So our very first step is to deal with that plus 5 by doing a minus 5 on each side. After we simplify what's on the left, we're left with just 3x, and on the right, negative 13 minus 5, or we can think of it as negative 13 plus negative 5, is negative 18. Now, we've got the 3 to deal with. The 3 is being multiplied, so we're going to undo that by division. So we're going to divide each side by 3, and we're left with x equals negative 6. Now, don't forget, you're supposed to be writing all this down on your note sheet, and write it exactly like you see it here, because that's a model for how we expect you to be doing the problems on any work or assessments. Now, just like before, we can check to see if this solution is correct. We can confirm it by plugging it in. So we can start with our original equation and then plug in negative 6 in place of x and see if it works out the same on both sides. So we first multiply and get negative 18. Negative 18 plus 5 is negative 13, so yes, it does check out. That's what's so great about this work. You can leave any quiz or test knowing you got everything right if you check it. All right, example 2. There's our x, and what's with it? In this case, there's a divided 4 and a negative 8, a subtracted 8. So we want to first do any adding or undo any adding or subtracting, and so the first thing we're going to do is plus 8 on each side. So we're left with x over 4 equals 20. And now we need to undo the division by multiplying. So we're going to multiply each side by 4. That gives us x equals 80. All right, another example. 65 minus x equals 10. So there's our x. We're going to deal with the 65. It's a positive 65. So we're going to subtract 65 from each side. Now, we've got to pay close attention to that minus sign. That goes with the x. So really what we're saying is that it's minus x, or you could think of it as negative 1x. So when we rewrite the x on the next line, we've got to make sure and include that because it didn't go away. We had 65 minus 65 made 0, but then we still had minus x over there on the left. On the right, 10 minus 65 is negative 55. Well, we're not done because we need to know what the value of x is, not the value of negative x, or really what this is showing is the opposite of x. So it's telling us the opposite of x is negative 55. So one way to deal with that is to think of it as a negative 1, and then we can undo it by dividing each side by negative 1. So negative 1x divided by negative 1 is going to be positive x. Negative 55 divided by negative 1 is positive 55. And if you think about it, if the opposite of x is negative 55, that means x would have to be positive 55. All right, time for you to try. Pause the video, give this one a shot, and come back when you've finished. All right, let's take a look. There's our n, our variable. We're going to first add 10 to each side. We get 44 equals 8n. We divide each side by 8. And you can see that 44 over 8 doesn't come out to be a whole number. So if that's the case, you're simply going to reduce the fraction, divide the top and the bottom by 4, and leave your answer as an improper fraction that's in simplified form. So our answer is n equals 11 halves. Even though it's improper, it's still simplified because you've divided out any common factors. All right, example 5, give this one a try. Pause the video. All right, let's see how you did. There's our x. First thing we're going to do is subtract 17 from each side. We get negative 20 equals x over 5. We want to multiply each side by 5. Now take a look. I put parentheses around the negative 20 also, because if I didn't, it might look like subtraction. So I help myself out and know that it's multiplication by putting those parentheses around the negative 20 as well. Then we get negative 100 equals x. One more for you to try. Pause that video. All right, the first thing we're going to do, there's our x. So we're going to subtract 15 from each side. 26 minus 15 is 11. We've got to pay close attention to that minus x, subtracted x, so we have 11 equals negative x, or the opposite of x. Another way that we could do it, instead of dividing each side by negative 1, is multiplying each side by negative 1. Either of these methods are totally fine. So if we multiply each side by negative 1, we'd get negative 11 on the left, and then negative 1x times negative 1 is positive 1x. That's just what we want. So x is equal to negative 11. And that makes sense, because if the opposite of x is 11, then x would have to be negative 11. That's it. Don't forget to put your note sheet in your binder.